Dr. Simon. This one is not. It's through something. Well, and it might have to going on. Okay, we can hear. Okay. Mariano, are you back? Mariano.
Hello, we can hear you.
Perfect. All right. So welcome back, everyone. So it is my immense pleasure to introduce someone who actually doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to take about 50 minutes for this introduction because she's the most accomplished woman in medicine I've ever met in my life. And the whole reason I came to Mayo to do my fellowship was 2 minutes after meeting her and went, whoa, there's no way I'm saying no to this. So yeah, fangirl, crush really hard. And actually at the end of my interview, I remember I was in the parking lot with her. She walked me downstairs. I was like, should I hug her? Should I hug her? Don't hug her, Nadie. It's not professional. Don't hug her. But it was really an awkward moment. But kind of fun. Did you hug me? I didn't then, but then we talked about it at the second interview. We're like, I was going to hug you. Like, I was going to hug you too. And then, she weren't sure, yeah. So we hugged after. It's all good. All right. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Leslie Simon. She is the chair of our emergency department here at Mayo Clinic. And she also serves as the medical director of our simulation center. She is the fellowship director for the medical simulation program and holds the academic rank of associate professor of emergency medicine at Mayo Clinic. And recently has yet another job where she's in charge of all the emergency departments across Mayo. Yeah, and that's huge. Yeah. So Dr. Simon earned her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville and her medical degree from the College of Osteopathic Medicine Nova in Southeastern University, Davie, Florida. She completed an internship in family practice at the Naval Hospital of Jacksonville and an emergency medicine residency at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, of course, serving as the academic chief resident in her final year. And we're just getting started. So from 1998 to 2008, Dr. Simon served as the Medical Corps Officer for the United States Navy. She deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, where she directed mass casualty and emergency medical services. And prior to joining Mayo Clinic in 2013, she held positions in emergency medicine and military and teaching programs at the University of Florida College of Medicine in Jacksonville, Naval Medical Center San Diego, Naval Hospital Guam, and Naval Hospital Rotas, Spain. She has been invited to present on her work internationally and has numerous publications in high impact journals. She's a national faculty member of the Difficult Airway course, an amazing course, and everyone should take it, and has trained thousands of providers in airway management, including myself twice. She serves as reviewer for Western Journal of Emergency Medicine, Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine, Emergency Medicine Practice, clinical teacher, and the MedEd portal. In addition to her roles in simulation, research, and patient care, she's highly active in teaching and mentoring opportunities. And throughout her training and career, Dr. Simon has been lauded for her teaching skills and service to emergency medicine and simulation. For her services in the United States Navy and Marine Corps, she was awarded the Navy Achievement Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Medal, and the Commendation Medal. Her most recent honors, include the first place for program innovation conferred by the Society of Simulation and Healthcare Award, Service Award for Commitment to Education, conferred by the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, Exemplary Teacher Award, conferred by the University of Florida College of Medicine, Outstanding Faculty Teaching of the Year, conferred by the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Florida. And she's asked me about 4 times to stop, so I'm going to stop there, but you can imagine the list goes on and on. And we are so lucky to have her here. Welcome, Dr. Simon.
Thank you. I didn't even know what to say. And the worst part is she asked me for a bio. And so, and what development does at Mayo Clinic is they write it for you. So I emailed Pam Kroger her and my secretary and said, hey, do you have a bio on me? And she said that to me, and I was like, yep, that looks like me. And I forwarded to Minnie, and I really wish I hadn't done that, because now you all got to hear that. So anyway, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Mercado, for asking me to talk about this. And so she asked me to talk about systems integration, which is a big part of what we do in simulation. So, most of you are probably familiar with the Mayo Clinic 3 shields. I know not everybody hears from Mayo Clinic. So, the center shield is our clinical practice shield, and the other 2 shields are the research shield and the education shield. And one of the things that I really love about being involved in simulation at Mayo Clinic is it's a chance for us to pull all 3 of those shields into our work. And I think you guys will see every day how the work you do in simulation really impacts all 3 shields of our practice at Mayo Clinic. So many of you know about the history of our simulation center. So we opened based on a donation from the Weaver family when they sold the Jaguars. So when they sold the team, some of the proceeds from that were donated to Mayo Clinic to develop the simulation center. And we, part of our charge as the recipient of that gift was to become a resource for the whole community. So we're not just here for Mayo Clinic, we're here to serve the community as well. And it gives us this really unique opportunity to work with all sorts of different types of groups and see how they interface and how they interact. So, simulation has its roots in the aviation industry, and I too have my roots in the aviation industry. So I've never actually worked for an airline, but I'm the daughter of a naval aviator. So I grew up around airplanes my whole life. And so my first experience with simulation was when I was about 8 years old. I had strep. My 80s parents, they don't like not go to work because their kids were sick. They have figured it out. So my mom, who was a teacher, sent me to work with my dad, who was a pilot. And at the time, my dad was stationed in Pensacola, in the place where they train new pilots to land on aircraft carriers. So that's what he did. He landed T-34s with brand new baby pilots on an aircraft carrier floating out in the Gulf. And he's saddled with this 8-year-old kid who's got her pajamas on, asked her up float and wants popsicle. So his solution to this, since he had planes to fly, was to stick me in the flight simulator. Oh, this is the T-34 flight simulator. And I had never flown an airplane. I spent the whole day in the flight simulator. And by the end of the day, I could land that plane right on the aircraft carrier. I crashed into the ocean about 40 times before I figured this out. But at the end of the day, I could land on the aircraft carrier. So, was I ready to land on the aircraft carrier? Of course not, because I learned a skill and I learned how to actually operate the controls on the plane, but I didn't understand the system. I never actually been in a T-34. I did not use the radio. I didn't even know if I could reach the controls. I didn't have a flight suit. I didn't know anything about the Navy. And there was no way I was going to take that skill that I learned from my day with popsicles in the flight simulator to actually land on a carrier. And when you think about what we do in simulation, we spend a lot of time teaching people skills. They come in and we say, okay, here's this blue phantom. We're going to teach you how to put it on a central line. But getting that skill, that piece, or what you learn from a one-day ACLS course, really doesn't teach you how to function in the system and how to actually deal with sepsis in the ICU or to run a code in the emergency department. You don't learn that. And so, so that is kind of the basic piece of simulation. But what makes simulation, I think, a really powerful tool is that ability to use sim to integrate people's technical skills that they learn from the task trainer into practice in their actual real world. So, so that's really what systems integration is about, is how do you take these 2 or more systems that really weren't designed to work together and turn them into a functional ecosystem. I took the slide from our faculty development course, but I think it's always a good reminder of how you approach simulation. When you're creating a sim that you want to be effective, you have to be pretty intentional when you develop it. So your first piece is your needs assessment. What am I actually trying to do? Which seems like an obvious question, but it's amazing how often simulation exercises don't start with that. They don't come up with a plan. They're like, we're going to do something about this. And they don't really have a clear definition of what their needs are. So you don't know if you met your needs unless you know what your needs are. So you use that needs assessment to figure out what your actual goals are for your simulation. And then you use those goals to develop the scenario. And then the really important piece is that assessment piece. After you've done that, And it usually happens around the dry run time where you run it and you go, oh, well, that didn't work. Or you run it and you realize that there are some real flaws in your system or in your team or in the way that you're approaching this problem. And then you modify it, and then you go back and do your needs assessment. And sometimes you have to go through the circle 2 or 3 times before you actually come up with a plan that's going to work. And I use that, I use it in the simulation center, but I also use it when I'm approaching practice issues. I use the exact same system every time I'm approached with it or presented with a new problem. So in situ simulation is my favorite kind of simulation. And in order to be successful with in situ simulation, you really have to have two pieces. You have to understand the system factors. So this is the process, the tech, the resources, and then the human factors. You know, who is your team and what are they capable of doing and what are their limitations? So, you know, system factors, you know, this old quote, and I forget who actually said this, I should have figured that out before I stole it from him, but, you know, every system is designed to perfectly accomplish the results that it gets. And, you know, you see that all the time, but so often, you know, people are really disappointed with the result of the process, but then it's the process. It wasn't going to get anything other than what you ended up with. So simulation is a way to look at that and modify it, and then figure out if your process is actually meeting your needs. So the system. So you can't really test a system unless you understand it, sort of. And what I mean by that is, and I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we've done through the simulation center, but you have to have a basic understanding of the system in order to test it, but that doesn't mean that you have to be a subject matter expert. So sometimes I realize that I do the best in testing a system or objectively looking at a system when I'm not the expert, when I have questions and I come from a point of not really getting what they're trying to accomplish, because it forces me to ask those questions that might be obvious if you were a subject matter expert. The environment. So the environment is critical, and that's why anytime we do things in the Sim Center, we really try to mimic the actual environment as best we can. So when we built our Sim Center, we used the practice to create the room. So the emergency department is a copy of what our recess rooms in the emergency department look like. And Jean was part of this team that developed this. You know, the ICU looks like the ICU rooms, the OR looks like the operating room, because it feels real. But in order to get a real level of fidelity, usually your best bet is doing in situ simulations. So you're actually testing things in the environment where they would occur. And then sociological fidelity is important too, because everyone should always play the role in simulation that they would actually play in their real practice. You know, I remember the first time I took ACLS, I took it with a group of medical students, and we're all medical students, and yet one of us, you're the nurse and you're the respiratory therapist and you're the doctor and that doesn't work, because the only person who's really learning is the person who's playing their real role. As soon as you're playing somebody else's role, you're not learning anything, because you immediately lose sociological fidelity and you tend to disengage. So the other, you can't really talk about systems without talking about human factors, because despite, you know, our best intentions, humans make mistakes. You know, we miss here, we misunderstand, we get bored, we get tired, we get hungry, we get disheartened, we get disengaged, and all these things are inevitable. And so accounting for that as a piece of the puzzle when you're looking at system integration is really important. So there's 3 pieces to human factor science, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but it is sort of interesting. And these are ergonomics, analysis, and engineering. So ergonomics, I always thought ergonomics was like, ergonomics is the chair that you sit into, your back doesn't hurt. It's the keyboard that you have so that you don't get carpal tunnel when you're typing, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. So ergonomics looks at every aspect of a task or process where human error can affect your outcome. So it touches all sorts of different disciplines, you know, psychology and sociology and engineering and biomechanics and industrial design, interface design. And this is all a piece of, do you have the right tools, do you have the right environment, do you have the right mindset to make your system functional? Analysis, okay, this is looking at all the pieces that cause the wheels to fall off the bus. So, you know, we looked at this in the emergency department specifically on interruptions. How many times do you get interrupted during a shift? Oh, hundreds of times, sometimes thousands of times where you get interrupted. You know, your pager goes off and the phone rings and somebody taps you, and somebody shoves an EKG in your face and somebody goes, oh, but no, I'm studying. And you do this constantly. And every time you do that, it breaks your concentration. other pieces, like missing and unclear instructions, noise, unpleasant conditions. When I first got to Iraq, we practiced in a tent initially I was in Kuwait, and it was 140 degrees, and we were in a tent that had a generator with an air conditioner that would cool it down to about 95 degrees. Okay, so unpleasant. And the other thing is, it was run by a generator, so there was so much noise that I had this stethoscope hanging around my neck that was completely useless because I couldn't hear anything. So those type of ergonomic pieces where I figured out, actually, if I want to listen to somebody's lung sounds, I can't use my stethoscope. I have to use the ultrasound machine because I can look and see if they've got it in the thorax. So, so those type of pieces are really important when you're designing looking at work factors of your system. People factors, again, skill level of training, what makes people bored or distracted or tired or disheartened. And then organizational factors too. A lot of, systems fail because of poor planning or high pressure or lack of, safety or responsiveness and communication. And these all come out in simulation, and you usually hear all about these things in the debrief. And you often don't know unless you go looking for them, that those are there. These are the low-level complaints that people just sort of file away and deal with in real time. And then when you actually look at the system in simulation and then debrief these things, you hear all about it and you realize, wow, why do we let that happen? Why are we doing this way? The engineering piece, this is all the equipment, the tools, the machines, the systems used in the process. And the goal, of course, is for the tools to harness the capabilities and to account for the limitations of the people who use them. And the other piece of this is it incorporates that why, why the decisions humans make sense. Because if you can understand why an error is made, then you're much more likely to find a productive solution. Again, huge part of what we do in simulation with debriefing, because people do the wrong thing for the right reasons and the right thing for the wrong reasons, and you will never know unless you ask. So that's another big piece of the system. So I talk about a couple of different big scenarios that we've done as a team, and a lot of you here in the room are engaged in this ECMO transfer piece. And as you know from my very long, fabulous introduction by Dr. Sahi, my other hats are I chair the emergency department. I also run the transport service. So, working with these teams to bring very sick patients into our hospital is a pretty complicated process. So, just to tell you a little bit about ECMO, ECMO stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. This is a process where you essentially take a patient's blood out of them, you put it through a machine that removes carbon dioxide and adds oxygen and warms the blood back up and then puts it back into your patient. And there's a whole bunch of different indications for why we would use this. Most of them are primary cardiac or lung problems. We use it a lot during COVID with the patients whose lungs didn't work. So we had to bypass their lungs because their lungs couldn't oxygenate their blood. So there were a lot of patients that were placed on ECMO during COVID-19. In Jacksonville, we are the only hospital that does transplants. So while there are other hospitals that can place patients on ECMO and put them on bypass, often these patients, the only way they're going to get off of that, sometimes they recover, and sometimes you use it as a bridge to allow their lungs or their heart to heal. But sometimes that's not going to happen. And sometimes the only way to disconnect these patients from this machine is to get them transplanted. So if they get placed on ECMO at another hospital in the area, the only place they're going to get a transplant is here. So we have to figure out a way to get these patients from other hospitals into Mayo Clinic so that they can get the care that they need. So this sounds simple, but it's not, because these are sick patients and there is an awful lot of equipment and people and expertise and risk involved in moving these patients. So, and also understanding sort of what can go wrong with an ECMO patient is sort of inherent to testing the system, and there are a lot of risks to these patients. First of all, they've got two big central lines, and either in two big veins or in a vein and an artery. These can get clotted, these can get dislodged. The patients, because their blood is being removed from their body and brought back in, all the complications that can go with that, bleeding, infection. And then they're high risk for developing clots in the system and having strokes or having other thrombotic type complications. And that's just a short list of things that can go wrong. I mean, that's the other thing you learned in STEM. Things can go wrong that you never thought of. So there are a lot of potential places for this to fall apart. So when we tested the system, first we talked through the process. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to take patient from one hospital ICU bed, get him in the ambulance, and then take him to another, bring him to our hospital and put him in the ICU. So how are we going to test this? So first of all, we figured out our team. There's the sending physician, the sending respiratory therapist, the sending RN, and then there's the receiving physician, which also includes the receiving care team. And then there's the transport team, which is the ambulance crew, which consists usually of a paramedic and an EMT who's the driver, potentially a paramedic and a nurse, a perfusionist, and then an ECMO specialist. And we have to get all these people and this very sick patient and all this stuff in an ambulance. And a lot of these people have never been in an ambulance before. So here's first picture of our simulation. So this is one of our standardized patients who is moulaged up to look like a ECMO patient. And they look like that, except for often they'll have like 2 or 3 more drips than we actually had. And this is our transport team, the perfusionist, and the ECMO specialist from our ICU. And they are working on packing this patient up. And step one is just getting the patient out of their ICU bed onto the stretcher without disconnecting anything. And then we got to get them in the elevator. And then we got to bring them downstairs and get them into the ambulance. So loading them into the ambulance. And then you got to figure out, there's not a lot of real estate in this ambulance. Like, where are you going to put all these people and all this stuff? And who needs to sit where? And who's going to ride backwards? And is it going to be somebody who gets car sick when they're in the ambulance? It's going to be somebody who has a panic attack if you have to turn the siren on. So there's all sorts of pieces that could go wrong. And you also notice in the ceiling in the upper corner that's the telemedicine unit. So we also want to make sure this works, because if something goes wrong, there's no room for the doctor in the ambulance. I'm not getting in there, and neither is the ICU doctor, because there's nowhere for us to sit. And we probably wouldn't be very helpful anyway, because you just need us to help you if you get in trouble, but you don't really need us to take up space because there isn't any. So we got to make sure that works, so that on the other end, we can talk to you while you're en route. We've been using telemedicine quite a bit in the emergency department for a bunch of different reasons, but we want to make sure that connection works as well. And then once you get here, now we got to get you out of the ambulance and into the emergency department, back into another elevator, and then up to the ICU in your bed. So, and the first time we ran through this, all we wanted to know is, can we move this patient? We didn't try to make it hard. We didn't have the patient code in the ambulance or pull out one of the lines or have the ventilator start alarming or any sort of problem, because we just wanted to make sure we could actually do it, because we'd never actually tried to fit all the equipment and all this personnel in our ambulance before. And a lot of you guys were involved in this, and grateful to you for your help, because it was a lot of work making this happen. And so first time we just tried to move the patient. The second time we started adding complexity to it, and we have a few more. We're just gradually increasing the level of difficulty until we know that we're ready, because this is a big undertaking, and the highest risk for a critical patient is during transport. And this is the same thing I dealt with while I was in Iraq, because we did a lot of simulations about medevacing patients out, because these patients are sick. And as soon as you put them into an ambulance or in a helicopter, they're really vulnerable because of the environment. It's really tough to intubate someone who's not already intubated in a moving ambulance or in a helicopter, or put in a chest tube if you're a patient that has a pneumothorax that you didn't notice before you left, and now it gets worse when you go to altitude. So really understanding what can happen during a transport and how to deal with it. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about our secret partner that we don't actually talk about. But so we've had the privilege of working with SpaceX in the last year. And this is a lot of fun and a really exciting thing for our team to be part of. So we get asked to help in 2 areas. The first with the on the launch pad, and I'm not going to play the video, but I had a pretty simplistic understanding initially of what could happen on the launch pad. It seemed to me it was like kind of binary. It's like a disaster where it blows up and it doesn't matter what kind of training you did because there's nothing to do, or it's nothing happens. It's like, who needs to go to the bathroom? But there actually is some gray area. And so again, the first thing we really needed to know is how the system works. So we had to understand, okay, what actually is happening on the launch pad? You know, how do you do this and what could go wrong? And we use this to build the scenarios. And so we needed to understand the launch process, but we also needed to know from, and some of this was of course classified, but understanding their after action reports and what kind of things had gone wrong. And a lot of this stuff is available, you know, news and case reports and stuff of accidents that have happened, you know, in conjunction with space travel. And so we learned a lot of that stuff, of all the things that you wouldn't normally think of that could go wrong. So many of you know Dana Herrickle, who's such a star. So, and she's also, in addition to being a star and an amazing educator, she also has talent for making movies. So I'm going to show you her pre-brief movie that we used for SpaceX. And I have several, I won't show them all to you, but it is pretty cool to watch. Here, if I can get it to play. Good, I'm not locked out of YouTube, so that's good. But I have to turn my volume on. Oh, what's that thing? Oh, you know what? I only shared my I don't think I can show it because I shared just Zoom. You have to change the view. Yeah. Sorry, guys. No, you don't. I think I just shared PowerPoint, so I need to share more than that. I knew I was going to work. So that's okay. Yeah, that did work. You can't tab over and share it over. I think when we set it up to share it, only shared PowerPoint, so it won't share YouTube. That's okay. We don't need to, but Dana Herrickle put together a great pre-brief and debrief and some scenarios for these. So let's see if I can get back to it. So, and then we did the same thing with the recovery boat, and this was really interesting. We needed to understand, like, how does the capsule come back? And this picture is a little off for the one that we did, because we actually worked with Inspiration 4, which was the first mission that was all civilians, and they actually didn't go to the space station. They didn't dock there. They just went up and orbited and then came back. So it was a little bit off, but we use this for future mission training, so we understand how does the capsule come home. And it's a process. You know, once the capsule hits the atmosphere, then the parachutes release, and so obviously there's a point where things can go wrong. With what if one of the parachutes doesn't open and they spin? You know, what if two of them don't open and they fall too fast? There's, you know, potential for trauma. And then the next piece is, you know, once it lands, they just drop it in the ocean, and then the recovery boat goes out and picks it up, and they've got a big lasso thing that they use to capture the capsule, but then you got to haul it out onto the deck. And so there are a group of there's a team that retrieve the capsule and bring it on the recovery boat. And then on this recovery boat, there's a little 4-bed emergency department, which is where the teams will receive the astronauts and take care of them. So you have to get them out of the capsule. And there's Nitty taking a picture inside the capsule, which you're not supposed to take, but I took a picture of you taking a picture of them. So that was a piece too. How do you get them out of the capsule safely? And then once you've treated them on the recovery boat, if they need to be medevac, now you got to get them up to the roof. You can either carrying a stretcher up to the roof and now put them on the helicopter, and then the helicopter will take them to the hospital. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't show you these videos, but anyway, maybe again. So you don't have to make it hard. You know, the SpaceX thing was a big production because it was a whole bunch of moving parts. You know, we worked with the SpaceX aerospace physicians. We worked with the Axiom physicians who work for NASA. We worked with the PJ group, which is the Special Forces medics who help transport the patients from the recovery, from the capsule to the recovery boat, and then fly with them in a helicopter to take them to the hospital. And then when we worked on the launch pad, we also worked with the Cape Canaveral Fire Department and then the local county fire rescue department in case there was a mass casualty. So it was a whole bunch of different groups that had never worked together and a chance to work with them. So it was fun. It was really a cool project. Sometimes, we have to do things on the fly, and, I'm an emergency physician by training. So I when I need to do something, I kind of do it now and can't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. So, just when we thought like we were done having a pandemic, which obviously is not happening, then all of a sudden we get this, monkeypox scare. So we came up with this plan, in which the details of the plan are not important, but there was a flow chart that was developed sort of by emergency medicine, but also sort of by IPAC and sort of by, hospital incident command control that deals with pandemics and crises and that sort of thing. And so anytime you get a flow chart that's this detailed and you're going to try to use that in the ED, it's like, oh, that's not going to go well because people can't follow that many directions. We have limited attention spans. We got to make a decision and move on and do it quickly. So I saw this flow chart. I went, oh my God. So I reached out to the Sim Center because that's to me how I test something like that. And sure enough, Amy made me some monkeypox. So that's Mellish. And again, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how the scenario was going to play out. I just said, okay, our standardized patient needs to show up in the emergency department and check in like any other patients with the chief complaint of rash and show them this and see what they do.
Yes.
And see, we talked about the flow chart. I sent everybody the flow chart, and now we want to see, can you actually execute this plan? And it was, it's always eye-opening because everybody who thinks they know what the plan is, when you send it to them in a staff meeting or an email, panics once they actually have to execute a plan that they haven't done before. So it was really helpful. And we actually made some modifications to the plan, based on what happened during the drill. So I don't have a whole lot more to say. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to share a couple of Dana's videos with you so you can watch them. But I'm happy to answer any questions too if anybody has any about how to integrate SIM into your system. But you guys have all seen this before. Let me see. I think if I stop sharing, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then share again, maybe it'll work. Share my desktop. Because some of you guys haven't seen Dana's video, so they're rather awesome. So. Sorry, I'm making anybody dizzy. Oh no, it's still a shot. No, I didn't find my share.
You got the expert coming your way. 10,
9, 8.
No, I won't share you too.
I think we don't have audio in there. Can you share with audio?
4, 3, 2, 1, 1.
Mm-hmm. Minimize.
I know, she's awesome. I closed and you stayed there. Well, we'll do the other. I should have tried it down. Show them too. Yeah. I think you have to share. Go in slideshow. So these are the scenarios that we used on the launch pad.
Launch minus 3 minutes. Stage 1, liquid oxygen secure. We have received airspace violation. Flight controllers and crew to stand by until airspace clear. We have confirmed the airspace violation. This airspace violation has been identified as a possible threat. Trajectory is lining up with Dragon. Crew, directed prediction controls, shelter in place. Repeat, shelter in place. Big, rocket. Okay. Look at that. They are coming to you with injuries. Remember, the base is on the so you will need to start relief.
That's the first scenario, and then we move to the second scenario. So, I'm not really echo status on it. I'm talking.
We'll now move on to scenario number 2. Fortunately, a faint neurosurgeon named Stephen Strange has given you a time slip, and you have turned back the clock and prevented the atrocity of the slide wire fiasco. The airspace violation remains a potential threat, and the base is on lockdown. The astronauts have successfully egressed from the slide wire baskets, and KOC fire team is on scene ensuring their safety.
really intense. Explosion of the trial everywhere. Trail team throw it down. Here to receive injuries.
That was our second scenario. But these are all based on things that could happen or have happened.
Watch a whole system in any cool down wind.
So it was a lot. Oops, I gotta share my volume off. Sorry about the technical difficulties. You know, that's like the first rule of simulation. Know your technology. Sorry, guys. It's been kind of a rough week. So I was hoping they would play flawlessly, but you know. Anyway, so we had a lot of fun at SpaceX. It was really a cool thing to do. And we did the same thing with the recovery boat scenarios. But we learned a lot about how, you know, rocket launches work and how the recovery piece works. And I had a little bit of background in aerospace. I used to work for NASA when I was in the Navy because the space shuttle's emergency landing, it was at Morone Air Force Base, which is right near Rota, Spain, which is where I used to be stationed. And so I got to put on this spacesuit that the astronauts wore and be the patient. And they took me in a helicopter and dropped me off in a field in the middle of southern Spain. And then the Spanish trauma ambulance came and picked me up and took me to the trauma center in Sevilla. So I got to see the process. So, but it was really cool because the first piece was they couldn't figure out how to get the suit off of me. They had absolutely no idea how to remove the helmet. So I was like, well, there you go. Step one, if I needed oxygen, I can't take my helmet off. Oh so, but you would never know unless you tested these in your actual system. So anyway, thank you for having me. And I appreciate being asked. So thank you, Dr.
Do you have any questions, Dr. Simon? Mariano? Oh, Mariano has a question.
Hello, thank you. So I do have a question. So I noticed that you prefer doing those simulations using mannequins or standardized patient mainly? Because a lot of
I'd much rather use a standardized patient. Anytime that you can use a standardized patient instead of a mannequin, you should. And even if you're using procedure or doing procedures, I'd still rather use the standardized patient and then a task trainer, just because I think it adds to fidelity, especially for this type of simulation. You know, I teach an intubation course, which is all about getting the endotracheal tube in between the patient's cords. And in that case, you know, you can't really pay a standardized patient to do that. So we use mannequins for that. So for courses where you really can't do the procedure on a standardized patient, then that's better. If it's a procedure focused course, then you're better off using a mannequin or a task trainer. But for anything that involves communication or logistics or, you know, history gathering or that type of thing, you're much better off using SP. But thank you, great question.
We use both when we went to SpaceX.
We did, yeah, for sure. We often, so when we did the recovery boat scenario, and I can show you the video for that if you want to see it, but it's hard for me to share video clearly. So, but these were a whole bunch of people who had never worked together before, and all of our scenarios were pretty complex. And you know, as you probably know, the Dragon capsule has 4 astronauts in it, so they were always going to get 4 patients, and they weren't all going to be critical. Some were less critical, but they were always going to have 4 patients to manage. So as a warm up, we actually had our first scenario be one of the employees on the boat and had them have a cardiac arrest. So they had to run a standard ACLS code And for that, we used the mannequin because we wanted them to do CPR and do basic ACLS. And we, you know, it's always tricky when you're working with really an elite medical team. You know, these teams that take care of the SpaceX astronauts, these are, you know, special forces medics. A lot of them are, you know, physician assistants, and then our physician crew. Many of them were emergency medicine and critical care boarded, aerospace medicine boarded. So the people who I was training actually had more training than me. So you always have to be a little bit wary of testing the medicine piece. And we really weren't testing the medicine, we were testing the process. And to me, the process is really, use a standardized patient for that, much more so than mannequin. But for the warm up with CPR, we used mannequin. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for rescuing me, Josh.
Great job.
If I had had you last 2 days, it would have been so much easier. The kids have to come and feed all my meetings.
Call me anytime.
Thank you. You guys were all part of it. Great. Thank you so much. You don't have to talk last night at 10 o'clock, I already lots of wine. Okay. That's why I wasn't asking for it. It didn't exist. I'm good. So you didn't screen Mariano?
Mariana, can you see the slides?
No, I'm not seeing any presentation.
Just 1 second.
Did you share? Did you? You gotta share.
I'm there.
Is it good now, Mariana?
Yes, it is. I can see it now.
All right. So now we're going to start our Form the Roundtable activity. So we thought we would have a panel of simulationists and myself, the fellow, and we're going to present certain topics. So the first was ideas related to growing the relationship between education-based simulation and hospital-based simulation. So this sort of came about after a discussion of how do we return to sim after some centers had to take a forced pause in their programs because of the pandemic. Now people are getting back to it, and it strangely seems either people have forgotten or want to know if there's a new way to do this, or how do we get back from maybe not doing in-person simulation back to doing in-person simulation and linking education-based and hospital-based simulation. So I'll let you think about that one for a minute. The next question is how to grow the FHSA presence and participation in Northern Florida. And the third question was, what would members of the FHSA like to see and do more of? So these are sort of the questions that we were going to address with the panel discussion.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the panel, we have only three, Mariano, when me and myself in the panel, but we don't have more participants to even show up in the meeting. So if Dr. Simon and she can help us give you some idea. So
Well,
the first one was about.
Yeah, we'll put it out to our group actually, and maybe just change the format a little bit. So what do you guys think about some ideas to grow the relationship between education-based simulation and hospital-based simulation? Thank you, Dr. Simon.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for
On regards to the first topic that you mentioned, one of the things that I struggling now is like now that we are back in COVID, and especially in the medicine field, we have a lot of it was one of the fields probably that have not open to changes as far as new technologies and stuff like that. And during the pandemic, it was forced to do embrace more simulation into their training. So now that the pandemic is over and the in-person clinical skills are coming back, what do you think about this new wave of technologies that have been coming out, like virtual reality, augmented reality? From your perspective, what do you think is the future on that? Do you see that changing in the training that you do in the hospital? Or
I think he's asking in general, sort of, there were new technologies that were made available during the pandemic and how they may have affected or will affect the future practice of simulation. Is that correct, Mariana?
Especially for medicine, like I say, nursing already embraces a lot of simulation. But in the medical education, there was not really too much of that. And now we're seeing more of that in the medical field.
Michael?
Yeah, so
Why do you come up? Do you want to come up?
yeah, sure. Why?
Can you hear us if we're talking this regular, Mariana?
Pardon me?
All right, so this is what I have experienced during the pandemic for the nursing program at Florida State College in Jacksonville. We have did a Zoom meeting with the students using this is a BSIM software from Laerdal. We done that. It was a good experience. Basically, the instructor was driving the simulation, but the students have to give their information when they do the assessment. They tell the instructor to do the assessment, and then the outcome from that assessment, and then they will provide the procedure, what's next, and they continue on until the end of this scenario, and then after that they look at the results of what all the students have came up with, and that's one of the things that they've done. That it was very successful. And then the next thing, they did a Zoom. The instructor was in the sim center. We was running the sim, and we did a Zoom that way. They did the same thing by instructing the students, told the instructor what to do, and yeah, so everything's remote. We did that, and then for the Anonymous table, we also used the cloud software for the Anonymous table for the anatomy classes 1 and 2. That's 3 things that we've done.
Gwen has to leave because she's gonna take the flight. So thank you so much, Gwen, for coming. It was a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. But what was the person's name? I couldn't catch that.
Gwen, she's leaving, and Michael spoke.
Oh, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Right. Yes, I think Zoom it's being accepted as a use. I don't know if you ever have any experience with the virtual realities or augmented reality in your center.
Yes.
And how do you see those in your center?
Gosh, I feel like you could speak to this. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So specifically to VR and AR, we're building out an entire VR room as we speak. We're working on the AR side right now. We have CAE by Medics, which is the ultrasound mannequins that pair with AR technology through the HoloLens devices. And then with VR specifically, we're working to partner with Oxford Medical Simulation, which right now they have about 200 cases in their library that range everything from patient communication to skills that from a nursing department, sepsis, things of that nature. And they have the ability to create your own cases as well. So we're taking the approach that VR is going to enhance the learning experience in terms of being able to make users more comfortable with the skills that they're learning in VR, then being able to take those skills and go into a simulation, and then from simulation to go to practice. So we're kind of looking at it in that phased approach to help just continue to boost their confidence and trying to build out a room to have as much possibility as possible with VR and the opportunity that it can provide.
Thank you. I think, yes, I do agree with you on VR and augmented reality are things that can help reinforce the learning for the students. So appreciate your feedback.
Yeah.
Any other comments about the technology sort of aspect? Up in Canada during the pandemic, we did two things. One was we switched to tabletop because one of our sim centers in Ottawa, they decided no in-person simulation. So we did tabletop simulation using Zoom and talking through a case. So Zoom was helpful for that. So at least they had some exposure to scenarios, not ideally how we want in terms of the realism, but the curriculum wasn't broken completely or didn't have to stop completely. And then the second phase, they limited the number of people that could be around the mannequin and who could be touching the mannequin, which sort of impacted realism at times, but also actually enhanced it because we were short-staffed. So that was another sort of change that we had to do. I don't think there's any other comments. Marianne, do you have any other questions about tech, or did you receive any questions from anyone else?
No, I've not received any comments.
Okay. I'm just going to grab Daisy here. Some more questions about tech. Do you want to do the second one?
So there's another question, Mariano, or we are ready to close the meeting?
Well, the next two questions are for the ethics and HSA, so maybe we can read those for when we meet.
Yeah, the other two questions are how to grow the HSA presence and participation. I will say more, not only North Florida, but the whole Florida really. This is a big effort that we're doing, like, for example, today, and we need more participation. And even that we share this information since, I think, August, September, and sharing all our LinkedIn in our webpage with friends. So really
kind of disappointed. Yeah, it's the first one, which is fantastic because it's, and the Mayo Clinic, actually my boss offered the place to meet. That was great. Sorry, say that?
I just want to say it was excellent outcome. It is the first one in a long time since COVID. Probably we haven't have this alliance hasn't had any live in-person events since 3 years now, probably. For you guys to be the first one, I want to thank you. You opened the door for other centers to start motivating. To motivate other centers to do the same. As one of the first things that we want to do is, of course, get the word out for this group, for our people that are in our profession, to spread the word. I want to invite everybody to IMSH, which is going to be in Florida, very close to you guys. It's going to be in Orlando. We are in the works with the SSH group to have a table for us in the lobby area, just like they did on in the last AMSH. They have the California Alliance had a table in there. So we can hopefully recruit more people and see that this group is still active, even though the pandemic kind of hindered a lot of the activities that we're doing with that. So I just wanna, once again, I wanna invite people to invite their colleagues to join us. It's free. We're not, there's no membership fee for this. Also to come to MSH and stop in a table. If once we get confirmation, we will let you know on the side we are going to be there presence. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I think we will keep doing this job because we want more people join us and work together. Because that's the whole purpose, to networking and come out with ideas and support each other. So, well, I think we end the meeting. Mariano?
No, I just want to thank you for everybody in the Mayo to help us get this rolling. And this was going to be a blueprint for future in-person activities for the site, for the Alliance. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My team. I love them. Have been the whole time in here. So thank you so much, guys. They're fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
And I don't know, Dr.
Hold on.
Oh, man. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.